Okay, we are recording. So thank you everybody for joining us. This is the end of August 2021. We are I can't speak today. Good grief. This is the Microsoft Data Platform Continuity Virtual Group. And with us this month is Allan Hirt presenting one of the topics that is near and dear to all of us, or it really should be. This is SQL Server Business Continuity Foundations. Allan Hirt is the managing partner of SQLHA LLC, and I will go ahead and turn this over to him. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat window here and we will make sure to address them as soon as we can.
Thanks, David. So I can speak on this for hours. I know I don't have that. So I kind of tried to boil this down to the essence. And the reason, sort of as David hinted at, is that this is a really important topic. I know in last month's session, Edwin our talks will be similar in some places and different in others, because the reason I like to do this talk more than anything is that I've been working with SQL Server. Well, let me just give you a little background for me. So I don't want to assume that you guys know who I am. I've worked with SQL Server since 1992. I've been in the availability space since the late 90s for SQL Server. If you want to probably be somewhat correct, I mean, I might be maybe the grandfather of this whole topic here for SQL Server a little bit, because I wrote things like the SQL Server 2000 clustering white paper. I've been speaking on availability for over 20 years for SQL Server. I'm glad other people are doing it besides me these days, but it's one of these topics near and dear to my heart that we spend a lot of time talking about technology, and it's what I do for my consultants, obviously, for my customers a lot, ultimately. But what we're going to talk about today is more than SQL Server, and why business continuity and the things that come under it are more than a technology problem. You need the foundations, because if you don't have them, you won't get them right. So all my qualifications here, you can read them, not going to list them off. This is something I've really talked about for years, and not everybody will agree with me here. So this is why I labeled this slide Allan's Basic Definitions. When a customer says, I need an availability solution, that can mean anything to me. Do they need just something in a single data center? Or if you're talking about the cloud, is it in a single region? Different clouds deal with regions differently. You know, you have on premises. So, okay, is it single data center? Are we talking about where a solution may span multiple data centers? That means something else to me. So for me, the way I think about these things, and this sort of underlies everything I do with customers and when I talk to people in sessions like this, is that high availability to me, the concept of it is, I've got a problem in a data center, in a region in Azure or AWS or GCP. I can recover from that fairly quickly. And let's say in terms of a technology, and I don't want to get too deep into technology talk today, because you'll kind of see why. You have an availability group or an FCI. It can fail over from one server or node to another, and it's either automatic or manual, but generally you're down seconds to minutes, or not really at all, potentially. That to me is high availability. Pretty quick recovery, not a serious problem. Disaster recovery, think data center or Microsoft region or AWS region is offline, smoking hole in the ground. You know, look what sort of has gone on here in the US at the time of recording this. We just have had stuff happen in New Orleans again, unfortunately. We just had Henri go through the Northeast, which caused some damage, Hurricane Henri. So whether it's natural or man-made, some kind of catastrophic disaster happened. And both high availability and disaster recovery ultimately may share similar technology solutions. But really what we're talking about is, we want to make sure that the business can continue after something happens. It's really that simple. And that's why this is business continuity, and why the name of this group is the continuity virtual chapter. or that's short name of it, but you get the idea, right? It's not about just availability, because there are many aspects of being up and running than just, oh, hey, we're running. There's more to it. I want to stress, and I agree with what Edwin said last month. So if you haven't seen his video, please watch it. It's not about technology. A lot of people lead with technology first, and we're going to talk about that because as a consultant, I kind of have a unique perspective on this that you may not have if you're a full-time employee. What I like to always say is technology is the end result, right? It's of the whole plan, what you've agreed to, all that stuff. So it's the implementation piece, but it should never be the start. Now, the problem with that is that a lot of customers I work with start from there, and we'll talk about that as things go on, okay? The other thing I'm going to say, as somebody who's been doing this for 20 plus years, people will do, oh, we'll get to X later. We'll do just availability now, and we'll worry about disaster recovery later. I can tell you from experience, working with numerous customers for all this time, whether it was in my company or I was a consultant for someone else or a full-time employee, bolting on any type of availability solution to give you any kind of business continuity when you're already up and running is very hard, if not impossible to do. So you need to bake all of this in when you start. Doing it later will be very, very difficult, if not impossible. Okay. So at the end of the day, Edwin said how to get availability is a people problem. And we're talking two sides of the coin here. To me, it's a business problem. Business is obviously about people, but we're not designing availability for people. Well, we are, and we'll talk about that, but we're really designing it to support the business, okay? So to me, availability of any sort and business continuity in the above umbrella is a business problem. So you can pick headlines from any time period over the past 20 years, right? Even today. Systems go down, people are impacted. It costs companies money, costs them time. You know, a couple of years ago, British Airways had a systems failure. People couldn't fly out of Heathrow worldwide. Things have been were problematic. A few years back, the Petya ransomware got into FedEx and many other companies. For FedEx, it got in through a subsidiary in Italy, cost them $300 million close to it in lost productivity, wherever else, business, you name it. Small companies like mine couldn't absorb a loss like that. You know, big company like that, yeah, it hurts, but you know, anytime you're down, your company is affected. And if you have tight, shall we say, allowances, which we're going to get into here in a moment, then, you know, some of these could be resume generating events for you, or RGEs. You don't want to be on that end of it. Ripped from the headlines, and I have a personal connection to Hurricane Sandy, as a friend of mine passed away due to it because he was an EMT. But natural disasters, you can't account for everything. And Mother Nature has her own free will, if you will. She doesn't care that you've designed the best solution on paper. She'll take you out. And if you do stupid things in your designs, they're going to be exposed when stuff like this happens. So this one example for here, if you remember Hurricane Sandy roughly 10 years ago at the time of this recording, it was actually, the anniversary was a couple of days ago. It was over the weekend. It was Saturday, the 28th of August. There was one story where the data center had backup power. Awesome. Generators, cool. They were on the roof of a building in New York City. So with elevators down, power out, to keep things running, people had to go up and down stairs with diesel fuel to keep it running. That's kind of a design problem, right? Now, obviously, if you're running in the cloud or other places, that's not going to be a concern. But a lot of people are still running earthed businesses. That may change in the future, but I still see a world where people are still going to run some of that stuff. So you really need to think of all this stuff in a business continuity problem. That wasn't a SQL Server problem. It could become one, and it would become one if something went down. But that's a business problem, a design problem, and also a people and a human problem. For me, the most fundamental thing about availability or business continuity, however you want to say it, right? Because people are going to, I walk into meetings and people don't use the word business continuity. That's really what we're talking about, obviously. They'll say availability, and I want X, I want Y, I want Z. They'll come in with a laundry list of demands, kind of like, a ransom letter. Like, you must give me this, you must give me this, you must give me this. That's not the way to have this discussion. Here's why. For me, it boils down to, and again, echoing a little bit of what Edwin was saying, what's the why here? Why do you want to do this? Strip away technology. This isn't about the new CTO that came in and wants to blow everything up because he's got a favored solution route, right? Those people come in and say, oh, I hate SQL Server, so we're going to put in Oracle, or vice versa, or, people want to make their mark on the business. If you can't say to yourself, why are we implementing this solution? Well, if our trading system goes down, we're dead and will be fined by the government. All right, that's a great start. That has nothing to do with technology. Now, it gets difficult from there because you may have certain technologies or features that you have to use due to other requirements. Like if you're using third-party software, it may dictate what things you can and can't use and what will and will not be supported. That can become problematic in and of itself, which hinders availability. If your third-party software says we don't support always-on availability groups, what do you do if that's your company standard? I don't have an answer for that. I see that stuff all the time at customers. You have to think about what's worst case scenario, and we're going to talk about things like backups here in a moment. But this is all about assessing risk and the scenarios that you may hit and mitigating the things that are, and ranking them and saying, these are the most probable things to happen, but things that might be the most probable to happen may not even have a solution that you can work around. You just need to know about it. All this stuff must be documented and agreed upon, because what you don't want is, let's say something does happen. Well, if something does happen, how is accountability done here, right? So you need measurements. This is where Edwin talked a little bit about this stuff in the last session, but I want to dive here a little deeper. From a database standpoint, we care about things like recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, RTOs and RPOs. Recovery time objective is how long you have to get something back up and running. RPO is the point of time to which the data needs to be covered or brought back online. All businesses are going to tell you zero data loss. I don't suggest laughing at them, but that is unrealistic in most scenarios. There are technologies and features, be they third party or in SQL Server or whatever RDBMS you're using, that may get you close to that or even let you achieve that. But if you're in that disaster recovery type scenario where your data center or region is smoking all the ground, you may need to recover to an earlier point of time with your solution, whatever it is. So there's got to be acceptance of some data loss. It may be only a couple minutes, maybe a couple hours. Now, what that also ties into in terms of requirements is, what is your business and what is its hours? Is it life and death? Are you in a hospital? Is this system supporting people breathing? That's a very different concern than we're running a mom and pop store that's open 9 to 5. People don't really talk about this stuff. So the mission criticality of a 24/7 system that keeps people alive is very different than a mom and pop shop that's open 9 to 5 and may not have an online presence. Now, I can't imagine a business these days that doesn't have an online presence or doesn't take online orders, but they exist. And those are, you would design very different solutions for those. Now, hardware may have other concepts like mean time between failure, like disks and stuff like that have that. Simply put, that's the measurement. But the thing is, when something happens and poop hits the fan, if you've agreed that, okay, we've got an hour to get this up and running, that's your recovery time objective or RTO. They should leave you alone for an hour and then they can start bothering you. Or if they start bugging you, it's like, hey, we've got an hour to get this up. This is what we've agreed to. When stuff is happening, it's always chaotic. So, and the other thing you got to worry about is when you're measuring it, are you just measuring SQL Server? Are you measuring the entire solution? How is the accountability, again, being held here? Okay. And because it's, and the other part that people often forget is, as technologists, as whatever your role is, we're focusing on SQL Server, but there may be app servers, maybe web servers, maybe containers that do stuff. There may be even a non-traditional SQL server, whether it's Azure SQL DB, Cosmos, everything's got a different type of availability, right? So if that's your entire solution end to end and SQL Server's up and running, but the web server's down, or SQL's up, but the data feed servers that hit it are down, your availability measurement is only as good as that. You can't assess SQL Server in a vacuum or your database in a vacuum. It's not the only part of the solution, folks. We talk, for years, a lot of us have been around and most of us have. And if you're new to this, this is one of the most important slides because people will lead with technologies and features such as availability groups or vMotion. If you're looking at platform stuff, we'll talk about platform versus SQL Server built-in stuff in a little bit. At the end of the day, I mentioned on the previous slide, you need to think about worst case scenario. Worst case scenarios, you've got to take whatever you have, let's say it's traditional installed SQL Server on an OS. That could be in a VM, it could be a VM in a cloud, it could be on a physical server. So let's just hypothetically assume we've got that. Just backing up, not enough. You need to be testing those backups, meaning you need tested restores. If you don't do that, you don't have backups. Now, having said at that point, backups are just files on a file system, like a Word document is sitting on, or Google Docs or whatever, is sitting on a drive somewhere, be it local or up in a cloud, right? Or Dropbox or whatever. Now, if you've got a large enterprise, you've got thousands of databases in multiple environments, that may not be possible. I get that. Again, I work with customers every day. You need to take the systems that people will scream about and test those, and then randomly test other ones. I can't tell you how many times. I mean, I'm old. I'll be 50 later this year. I've been doing this a long time. And I've seen, back in the good old days of tape, where people were backing up to tape. And I know some of you can't fathom that, but it did happen. And backups would span multiple tapes. One of the N number of tapes was bad. There goes your backup. Or if you're striping today, like your SQL Server backups for performance across multiple backup files. If you don't test it, one of them went wonky, you don't have any valid backups. Any feature, and I'm talking platform layer like in VMware or built-in SQL Server like availability groups and failover cluster instances, do not replace backups. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that from somebody, I could be retired. oh, you don't need to do the SQL Server stuff or worry about it. We've got, or sorry, you don't need new backups because FCIs fail over. You still got a single copy of the data. The other one, other big problems I've seen, DBAs are on call at 2 a.m. for some work going on or something happens. But in companies that have centralized backup solutions, not just keeping them local to a VM or a physical server, if you need to restore at 2 a.m. and something goes wonky, who's responsible for making that restore? Because if it's a DBA and it's sitting in a system in the back, well, that's a problem. And to that point, where are the backups? Are they in that centralized backup system that's going to take 3 hours to pull it out from? And if your recovery time objective is an hour, you've already blown it. And if your backup is 20 terabytes of data, and that takes any number of hours to restore, again, if your recovery time objective is an hour end to end, that might be a problem. All these things you need to think about. And on top of that, are we backing up at a crash consistent or an application consistent? For SQL Server, we want application consistent. Again, I can't tell you how many times I see customers with VMs where they're doing these snapshot type, and different vendors will call them different things. So insert whatever you've got here, where you don't have a valid SQL Server backup, or it's not, they might be able to take valid SQL Server backups, but it's not set up right to do so. And in the process, you break SQL Server, or you break an availability group. And the DBAs tear their hair out. So you have nothing at that point. You literally have nothing. You got to stop that stuff. So a recovery strategy, it's not just backup and restore. A recovery strategy needs to be something that everybody's on the same page about. Okay. Another one that I've seen since I've started. KISS stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. If you deploy solutions that are super complex, and I can insert any number of features or technologies here, or things that look great on a Visio that managements can, tote around like, hey, look, we've got this awesome solution. Look at that headline from the Register from a few years ago around the BA thing. This solution was kind of what I was talking about earlier. You've got 200 systems making up that thing. If system 99 fails and it's an important cog in the works, the whole thing just goes. Maybe not a database problem, but you're down. So striving for less complexity, and that may not be possible, but you need to think about that. And that also applies to whatever database solution you put in place. So just because it looks cool and you may like availability groups or FCIs or distributed AGs or whatever, doesn't mean you should do it. Everyone talked about that a bit last time as well. Now, sometimes you get forced into those solutions for various reasons. Again, somebody may have already made a decision. Other technologies won't work and you have to use something, but then that will complicate the end solution. However you end up there, you end up there. Then it becomes a manageability issue. And that speaks to that third bullet point that nobody ever talks about. Really, it's really second one and third one combined. But let me talk more to the second one. I can't tell you how many times as a consultant, again, customer has the ransom list of give me all this or else, and go, okay, great. I'll design that for them. I'll make a nice Visio, knowing they'll probably never implement it. Present the solution. They're like, oh, that's great. Love it. Then they go to price it. Yeah, you got to pay for that too, by the way. Think about that. And like, oh, well, we don't have unlimited budget. And I'm talking, if you're doing physical, it's not just hardware, it's licensing. If you're up in any cloud, it's licensing. Okay. Licensing will arguably be the most expensive component. Microsoft has improved the rules as of SQL Server 2019 with the availability solutions if you're using the built-in stuff. But if you're using, for example, VMware and you want to do vMotion, you're going to need software assurance. That's an additional cost. Did you build that into your pricing or your budget? Nope. So sorry, not using it. Or find some money. Nobody talks about this when they talk about solutions. I've had to redesign solutions that we compromise. So end solutions, let me just say this up front, end solutions are compromises between cost, manageability, availability, and any other thing you want to throw in there. Because the other part about complexity is that if it's so complex that you can't manage it, you're going to break it. There's that human element that Edwin talked a lot about in that last presentation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about people today, but not as much since Edwin covered a lot of that. If your administration staff can't handle that solution, you're going to be down. It's a matter of when. It's not if, it's when. So again, stuff that looks good on a Visio diagram could be absolute crap in reality. You've got to be able to monitor this stuff. I can't tell you how many customers over the years I've worked with have poor solutions to know when a failover happens, to know when a server is down, to know X, Y, and Z. And then they have a problem and they want to get to root cause. Guess what? They have no information. Get the basics right. By usable and performing, availability isn't, look, I could design a solution for a customer that has 99.99% availability, right? That's 52 minutes of downtime a year, depending on how you're measuring that. Great. If it performs like excrement and is so hard to use, and I'm not just talking manageability here, but from an end user perspective, and nobody uses it, essentially that system is down. And on top of that, if you're having performance issues, sometimes the fixes for those performance solutions are downtime. So you can't just worry about availability. You've got to worry about everything else too. Other things I see that cause confusion in server down events, in general, are things like not having standardized builds of OSs in SQL Server, where every server is a different experience. It's like having a different flavor of ice cream every time you log in. Making sure naming conventions are well known and not obtuse. Again, I could riff on this for about 1,000,000 years of the bad crap I've seen. It's awful out there. Finally, I want to talk about, again, stuff I deal with all the time with customers, which is, should I do platform-based or SQL Server-based OS, if you will? Availability. The answer is going to be it depends. Depends on requirements, depends on a whole lot of factors. By platform, I'm talking like I can rehost this VM on another host. Now, what you have to understand there is this is where your, say, VMware folks are going to go, oh, you don't have to worry about SQL Server because I can remove this. Okay, so what happens if something happens inside the VM? VMware is not protecting me from that. But if I'm talking about SQL Server availability, like the addition of SQL Server will gate what features, or even within a feature, what subset of things are available in that. Or like how many, like in an availability group, how many replicas I could have as part of the total availability group. Usually, these types of solutions are a hybrid. Now, in pure cloud-based PaaS or platform as a service solutions, you may not have a choice of how it's done. The underlying provider for your cloud dictates, so if you're talking about pure RDS in Amazon, like, or you're talking about Azure SQL database, or Cosmos or anything like that, that's basically you flip a switch and you have availability, and that's it. You don't get to choose what you do, but you have to understand all that stuff. Okay. So this is going to be a bit covering a little bit of the ground that Edwin covered. So I'm not going to try and spend a lot of time here, but I do agree with Edwin. This is one of the most important problems that I see. When you're going through an availability exercise, especially if it's a server down one, if the right people are in the right place at the right time, you're going to have extended downtime, which is not what you want. You want to be able to be up and running as quick as possible. People don't know what they're doing. That speaks to skill sets and training and investing in people, investing in futures, investing in new technologies. You know, tech debt is a real thing. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. Communication is huge. You know, you don't want two people going on parallel paths and executing something. That's how, for example, you wind up in situations like split brain in a Windows Server failover cluster. Is you have people not either able to communicate, or they're so heads down and focused on getting something done, they do something stupid, and now you have a bigger problem. We're human, but the human element can help you. The human element can also line up the shotgun and blow your foot off, proverbially. I see a lot around, you know, I want to automate, for example, disaster recovery, switching between data centers. First of all, don't ever do that, please. I might come down and find you and hunt you down and shake you violently, proverbially. Please don't take that snippet and then somebody's going to, but you know what I mean? Because the thing is, it's very different, going back to my definitions of high availability and disaster recovery. It's very different in a data center if like, oh, lost a network card or whatever happened, I can fail over here, to I need to move everything in my infrastructure from Boston to London. Those are very different exercises. That decision needs to be made whose pay grade is probably much higher than yours. And that is a very conscious choice. And then you deal with all the fallout from that. So automation will make things more consistent in some cases. It will take guessing work out of, for example, the failover process. That stuff should be scripted. And maybe you have it as like a SQL Server agent job that's disabled that you can execute on demand. Totally cool with that stuff like that. Go nuts with that. But automating a lot of that stuff, automate builds, make them consistent. Automation has its place. But this DevOps world where everything needs to be automated, in my world of availability, I can tell you that almost everything I do winds up being the exception. You don't want that, right? You can't paint an all or nothing approach to how you do your work. That's not the real world. You need a lot of process. You need a lot of systems, and I don't mean technology systems, surrounding this so things go smoothly. Disaster events are chaotic when there is no process. You need things like, and that includes things like change control, right? So what takes a lot of people down from a process standpoint is lack of change control, meaning we're going to implement, we're going to roll out this change to our application this weekend. How many of us have seen, oh, you know, come in Monday morning, performance is in the tank, and everybody's screaming. You as the database professional in your company or as part of a team are tearing your hair out trying to figure out. Come to find out, the app team or the dev team rolled out some change that drastically altered how business is done, or a new query that just is gumming up the works, right? Did you know about it? If that answer is no, you need some friggin' change control. Because change control is simply, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, and it's anti-DevOps. I will tell you this, it's anti-DevOps. It's not like, oh, hey, like we'll just roll this out and whatever. It is, you put your change request in and you say, here's what I'm doing. Here's how I can roll it back. You need that rollback process. If you can't roll it back, don't roll it out. and how long it will take to roll back if there's a problem. I had a customer years ago that had to be up by like 6 in the morning because they had some batch process to run before they went live in the morning. So they knew if they were doing maintenance overnight, it had to be done by about 4:30 in the morning. So if they had to kill it, it would take an hour, hour and a half to roll back. Test those, make sure that, whatever. You need probably the number one thing I see that takes people out is patching and updating servers, and mainly at the OS layer, because we get SQL Server patches and updates, CUs roughly every 6 to 8 weeks. Most people don't take them right away, so they're on a 1 to 2 delay. So most people don't do those on a regular basis, generally patching Windows. Now, I will say if you're patching FCIs and AGs, there's a certain order that you should do things in. If you reboot enough nodes at the same time, depending on what version of the OS and you're using Windows, you can take the entire cluster out, meaning your availability group or FCI goes down, meaning you are down. Or if there a failover has to happen because you patched a server, how do you coordinate that? Patching and updating is going to be your number one biggest problem in all of this. People may disagree with me, but I've seen it enough for 20 years that I am pretty solid in my opinion on that. And on top of that, when I'm asking the question of what is your supportability strategy, meaning, do you have a support contract with your vendors? Was it accounted for in the budget? Now let's talk about supportability in a different way. It's one thing to have a support contract. It's another thing to make sure that your entire solution is supported. So here I've got, for example, the VMware compatibility guide. All right. And let's say you want to implement ESXi 7.0 U2. And now you guys, because this is not what you're thinking about necessarily, because you're database folks most likely watching this. But I want to run it on, and I'm just picking them. I'm not partial to anyone. Okay. I want to run it on HP hardware. Okay. Actually, I'm going to pick Fujitsu. Great. And, I could pick any number of features or whatever. It's going to tell me which model, which supported releases. Now, I could even do stuff like this, select multiple releases. Like, for example, this 2400E, if that's what you currently have today, and your folks tell you, oh, hey, we're going to update our servers to ESXi 7. Well, you can see here that 2400E, the original one, is supported through 6.7U2, but not any flavor of 7.0, let alone 6.7U3 right now. Oh, sorry, it is 6.7U3. My bad. Didn't read it right. I'm human. So if this is what you have for hardware, that means you would be unsupported from a VMware perspective. Do you want that? There's other aspects of supportability, which is life cycle. So, okay, you're currently on, ESXi 5.5 has dropped off this list, but you're currently on ESX 6.5, which I see a lot, or I see a lot of customers with ESXi 6.7. Notice that 6.5 and 6.7 had the same mainstream end date, which is 10/15/2022. That's just a year and a half, not even, it's just a little over a year from now. Is your company making plans to go to 7.0? Does it mean you need to take into account some sort of hardware upgrade? Are they just not going to care about that and say our hardware's good enough? I don't know. These are layers that you don't see, but these impact your supportability. Again, this is beyond calling Microsoft or VMware or Dell or HP or insert name of vendor here for a problem. There's guidelines the way VMware supports clustered configurations of SQL Server. Are you adhering to that? It's one of the few places that they can dictate what versions of SQL Server you can do. For example, there are a couple different KBs. Here's one of them. This is one for vSphere 7. So it's KB 79616. Microsoft has its own lifecycle stuff, which you should be familiar with. I just did a blog post on this recently. Windows Server 2016 is out of mainstream support. Stop. Or sorry to say, it's coming out of support. Mea culpa. Got ahead of myself. It's SQL Server 2016 that's fully out of support right now. Mainstream support. Understand what mainstream versus extended support means for your company. Did your company pay for extra special sauce to be able to get better support during extended? If the answer is no, mainstream means basically you're not going to get a whole lot of updates unless they're bad security ones past the state. So if you're still implementing Windows Server 2016, your company better get on the horse. And that means updating things I talked about, your build standards. That stuff all takes time. These are all things that contribute to availability and business continuity. You don't think about it because it's not an availability group, but this is all the stuff that sits underneath, tangible and intangible. Another one I'll also say from a supportability strategy, there are some vendors where you need to be a named contact to be able to call in. If you're the person on call and you're not a named contact, they may not talk to you. That is not good. Okay. Hold on. This, for some reason, I can't. Let me see if I can move this so I can get to. Of course, I cover up the thing I need to do to get back to the slides. Okay. Full disclosure, I used to be a QA engineer. It's how I interned at Sybase, so that's how I got into all this mess. And to this day, testing is in my blood. Things like QA are in my blood. And this is also along with things like patching, which is more of a process, if you will. One of the biggest gaps I see is people don't test. I've got a DR solution. How do you know it works? Well, we designed it right. You may have even documented the steps, but did you test those steps? And by test those steps, I mean literally take production out and fail over to your other data center. Some of you probably just flipped me the bird and said, no way, Allan, not going to happen. And I'm going to challenge you on that. I'm going to tell you that if you don't do that, you have not, much like when you have backups made, if you don't test the restores, you have no recovery solution. You have no business continuity / DR type solution if you're not testing that solution. I have customers who do this on a regular basis. I have other ones who won't. And if I have someone else say to me, look, I don't want to take production down, but I want to test DR, I'm going to tear all my hair out and go bald. That's not how you do this, folks. Because if you're testing something BS that isn't your real solution, you haven't tested jack. So what's your goal for testing something like DR? Is it testing the actual process? Is it just making sure that the systems come online on the other side? You need to understand all that stuff. And if you don't test, I guarantee you're going to fail. At least once. You'll learn from that failure, and it probably won't happen again. But you'll have extended downtime. It'll be chaotic. People may lose jobs. And let's also keep in mind in a disaster recovery scenario, and this is more of a people and process thing. Let's look at what's going on in this country right now in the South with, I think it's Ida, in New Orleans. So at the time of this is late August of 2021. So if people watching this in future have a historical perspective. New Orleans is telling people not to come home, that stuff is happening right now. When a natural disaster strikes, the last thing people are thinking about is, well, hopefully, they're more worried about family, friends, their own safety, to have food, shelter, stuff, that kind of stuff. That is first and foremost in their minds. They're not thinking about probably the company. Is SQL Server up? Right now, like some of those people in New Orleans are more worried about, when can I go home? So all this testing stuff, all this disaster recovery planning, all that, it doesn't matter when nobody's there to execute it. You have to be human in all this too. That's part of this business continuity stuff. Got to make sure your people are okay. Now, I'm not talking technology training. This is just pure being a good human being. Okay. All right. So back to the topic at hand here for a second on this slide. Sorry for the non sequitur there. It's not just SQL Server. Your purveyance of the world may be SQL Server here, but it's got to be end to end. Just bringing up SQL Server and saying we're good. Well, could the app come up? Is there a specific order that, the app server, because this third-party application is a piece of junk, needs to be started before SQL Server or vice versa? Because if it doesn't see it, it's got to go through this whole process. All that matters here. Did you document any of that? Do not be a single point of failure. You want to be able to do things like take vacations, document this stuff. And the other thing I want to say that drives me nuts is customers who implement feature X. Could be something like an availability group, distributed AG, FCI, even a platform level thing. They have it nowhere but production. Why? Just why? Why do you hurt me so bad? Don't do that. Because here's the thing. You want to be able to simulate what you're doing in production elsewhere. That doesn't mean if you have a 768 gig physical box that you need that in dev, test, or staging. You can simulate processes in virtual machines. If you don't have that, how can you see, for example, I have a customer right now who's having some networking issues. We've had lots of Twitters lately on how DNS is an issue, how other stuff is a problem, okay? How can you test a fix if the only place you can test that fix is production? You're throwing darts at a friggin' dartboard. Don't do that to yourselves. You're decreasing your availability because somebody either wanted to cut costs or thought it wasn't important, or as I said earlier, we'll get to that later. Later is here and you're failing. How's that serving you? Not so well, is it? Make sure you have someplace else other than production that has something similar. And you know how your apps behave. I mean, years ago, I had one of the first companies I implemented a cluster app back in about 2000, 2001. It was like SQL 7. And back then it was just failover clustering. It wasn't called FCIs because there were no concepts of instances for SQL Server in the sense that we knew them as 2000 and later. The app persisted to the SQL Server thing. If you guys could just mute yourselves right now, I will take questions at the end. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you. And the SQL Server installation failed over to the other node of the cluster, as it should have in this particular case. But the app couldn't reconnect because the app was persisting a connection. They didn't have anywhere else to test this. They didn't understand why. We figured that out. But if we'd had a test system, we could have known that. I mean, back then clusters were expensive, so I get it. But, you see where I'm going with this. Like, just make sure you do the right thing, okay? Okay. This is one we got to talk about, folks. I mean, we live in a very connected world, where companies are getting hacked. Ransomware is a thing. So first of all, make sure you have backups that are off-site and aren't connected, so that planning for worst case scenario. they're not corrupted. Because if you leave them on your systems that are affected by ransomware, well, you can do the math on that, can't you? Yeah, not a good scenario. So security is a key component along with performance and other stuff of availability, because these are the kind of things, and I'm not talking just, have a secure SA password or any stuff like that. All that stuff is important. We can talk about whether or not you keep SA and you disable or delete that and you use another account or whatever you do. I can't tell you how many times I walk into customers. Well, in this COVID world, I'm not walking into customers much these days, but where the admin password for the SQL Server account that you log into all the servers with, that's an admin on every account, is on the equivalent of a sticky note on somebody's desk. You're all nodding your heads. I can see it. Well, proverbially anyway, because you've been there. May not be your current company, but you've seen this. Security is as much as important, because once somebody's in, and that threat may be internal too. So, the old joke, how do I limit access to my DBAs? The answer there is don't hire them. It's a joke. The reality is you can't do that. DBAs need the access, so you need to make penalties severe. Firing and potentially more. I'm being honest, because our job is to make sure data is secure and available and reliable and performs well. We wear a lot of hats. And a lot of companies talk about security, but I think the past few years have shown us that companies are very insecure. When we're in a connected world, even if systems are behind a firewall, people can still get in. Cost FedEx $300 million for Petya. Look at all the ransomware stories over the past year or two. Look how T-Mobile in the States just got hacked. 48 million customers, myself included, affected. This is everybody's problem. And security issues will take you down. If you need to take your entire enterprise offline to stop an attack, you are now in an availability issue. Window dressing, and people may yell at me for this, and you may say, Allan, you're crazy. And I'll take that, but I'll also probably say back to you, I think you're wrong, and we can agree to disagree. Changing things like port numbers on SQL Server from something other than 1433 is security through obscurity. It'll take anybody with a port scan a couple extra milliseconds to find that. In my general mind, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying you have no reason to ever do that. But in general, worry about your bigger problems that you can get ransomware than what the port is on SQL Server. Because somebody can discover that through a port scan. If they're already in your environment, it's too late. You let them in. Don't let security become an availability problem. That leaky AWS buckets thing from just over a year ago, right? How many times do we see now where people are using a cloud-based data solution or storing documents up in a cloud, but somebody forgot to secure a bucket or the data properly, and it's been sitting exposed on the internet for God knows how long? There's more to business continuity than technology and availability groups and even just plain old requirements. It's all this stuff. Okay. So I've been yakking for about an hour. I'm sure you guys have some questions. But to sum it all up, I know I threw a lot at you. I breezed through a lot of stuff. By and large, as you can see, I align with a lot of what Edwin said. But I have a very different approach to a degree. I've just seen a lot of stuff over the years, good and bad. I have customers who do this stuff excellently. Over the years, I have customers who I've helped bring along to get them to do it excellently. And we go through teething pains. Because yes, people is arguably, and this is where I will agree with them, at the end of the day, there's a human element. You work through this stuff, okay? But the human element isn't it the whole thing, and technology is the end game. It's all that stuff in the middle, and knowing the business, knowing the things, doing revisions and iterations. Like when you define your RTOs and RPOs, it's not a one-time thing. You've got to revise those as the business changes, as the workload increases, whatever you've got going on. It's not one and done. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Little self-plug here. People have been asking me for a long time. Been a busy few years, but I'm going to have some online training around all the business continuity stuff, about features like availability groups coming in the next few months or so. I'm not going to say much more than that, but it's going to be very exciting. You guys will love it. So stay tuned to that. And with that, David, we can open it up to questions. I can look in the chat here, or people can potentially unmute themselves. Let me see what's in the chat first, though.
Sweet. Actually, the chat was more just commentary around how you're absolutely right with a lot of these topics, and just experiences that people have seen. If anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and speak up. We got plenty of time.
Okay, I'm just sort of seeing what people are saying. Let me start at the top.
Yeah, the anti-DevOps discussion I absolutely love, and I think we could do an entire hour group chat about that one.
I'm happy to participate in that. And look, let me be very clear here. So I'm going to get crucified anyway, but I don't care.
No, you're not. You're not.
I'm not anti-DevOps, but it conflicts with availability. It just does.
Yeah.
Like pushing stuff out and iterations and all that stuff. I'm all for it in the right environment. In a mission critical environment where I need to be up 24/7, complete conflict with that. Because the wrong thing takes me down. My trading system can't trade. I now start incurring government fees. Not my thing.
Yeah, it's got its place if it's done properly.
Yes.
All of the factors in there to make sure that things stay up with the rollback.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Sorry, no questions there. So feel free to, I'll stick around here for a couple minutes here. Like, feel free to unmute yourselves if you've got something to say or a question. Because the thing for me is, again, people naturally think I just want to talk about availability groups and FCIs and all that other technology stuff. I can, obviously, but that's not what gets you availability. It's really not, and all this business continuity stuff. So, or maybe let me pose a question to the audience. What challenges do you have currently? What things are you struggling with that maybe I have an opinion on or can help you with here? You can obviously reach out to me at SQLHA, maybe even be a consulting engagement, but do you have a quick thing that you're currently struggling with today that maybe, you just need an opinion on?
Yeah, feel free to unmute and chime in. I know for me, it's more of a rhetorical challenge, and it's people. It's people and their preconceived notions of what they think they want versus what they're actually asking for versus what they actually need. And it's a rhetorical challenge, and that's one that honestly keeps us both in business.
Well, and that's why I will design exactly what they asked for. And then what I always like to say about that is once they kind of reject that and go, oh, we can't do that, it then becomes, all right, can we have the real discussion now? Can we actually get down to what you really want and need versus what you thought you needed? Right. And that could come out in any number of ways, be it affordability. It could be too complex to manage. It could be, insert thing here. But yeah, people are the problem and the solution.
Mm-hmm.
But people have to be reasonable in getting to that solution.
I like that. Yeah, they have to be reasonable with it, and they have to understand that their preconceived notions and their beliefs on a certain topic may not be entirely accurate with what they're asking for and what they need. And a little bit of education should go a long way if they're receptive to change.
Well, but to that point, a lot of it is holding on to preconceived notions of this is how we did things on premises or in physical.
Yep.
Look, a lot of the documentation today for traditional SQL Server is written as if you're implementing on physical hardware.
Yep. When you add cloud, when you add virtualization, a lot of these things, they're not thrown out the window, but they're changed.
Yeah, and some of them are actually thrown out the window.
Some of them, yeah.
Right. Not all of them, but so you have to take that into account. And that's why I talked about, there's more layers to this. You can't go, oh, I'm doing an availability group. Okay, what does that mean? Are you doing this physical, virtual, cloud? IaaS, so it's still virtual, but could be different because you've got other stuff involved. How you do that in Azure is different than how you do it in AWS. Means different things for networking, for example. But when people do things like lift and shift, the biggest one, and people have seen me talk about this on Twitter. I have had conversations privately with people. Implementing FCIs in anything other than a physical environment has its place, but in general, not a fan for lots of reasons. Not going to go into that now. Maybe that's a separate discussion. But
feel free to send me an abstract for that one at some point.
but FCIs and doing what you did on premises isn't going to give you the availability you think up in a cloud or in virtualization.
Yep.
Because your failures are different. What that was designed to protect against isn't what you're doing in virtualization or in IaaS. So
I thought I have a question.
Yep.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, this is Dan.
Hey, Dan.
So in our company, we have a pretty heavy presence of always on.
All right. So you mean availability groups?
Yeah, availability groups, virtual installations.
Okay, yeah, because there is no
on-premise.
That's what's clarifying. Always on is a bubble. Both FCIs and AGs. That's what's clarifying.
Yeah. And we're looking at a long-term, like a slow migration strategy to get it to the cloud. And I've heard different perspectives of either doing a stretch as a baby step, or keeping it that way, an on-prem presence tied to a VM with that SQL installed on the cloud. But I feel like that's just overcomplicating it, and you might as well just migrate to the cloud and, software as a service, but whether it's IaaS or PaaS, you're getting HA there. So why create something that's complicated and unique rather than just use either Azure SQL database or managed instance or whatever you need, and you're going to have a certain level of HADR in doing that.
So there's a whole lot of independence on what you just said.
Yeah,
that is, I will just say from my experience, that is a consulting engagement. But I'll give you the short answer. So you can't, for example, stretch an availability group from on-premises to the cloud if you're using managed instance, for example. So if that's your end game, not possible to begin with. So they're pure technology limitations around how some of the stuff just works.
sure.
So in PaaS, so we're talking about, in that case, managed instance or RDS or Azure SQL database, you have no control over your availability solution. You also, at least in context of Azure SQL database and managed instance, can't go back to IaaS without just doing something like BCP and extracting the data out. So that's a one-way move.
Yeah.
Like once you're locked in, so you're not wrong in saying that, like, well, if we're going to go to the cloud, why don't we just go to the cloud? But let's say your cloud journey takes a left turn at Albuquerque. How are you getting back?
Yeah, from
you're
a
not.
data standpoint.
Yeah. I've seen this a couple times. It's very painful. So you need to look at the big picture of what's our, what's the why? What's our end goal, right? And when we talk about VMs in the cloud, that's IaaS. But it could also be like, for example, if you're using VMware, VMware has a cloud solution, and they have a cloud solution in Azure and Google and AWS. So are we talking like on-premises, physical or virtual, to that type of solution? Or are we talking to a straight IaaS VM in one of the clouds, right? Those are essentially implemented the same, but very different concepts wrapped around them. You have a native VM, if you will, in a cloud provider versus one that's just a VMware VM sitting in a cloud provider. And that has other benefits and or challenges, like maybe you could vMotion from on-premises to that VMware solution. Some companies aren't ready to go whole hog on the cloud, and it's very expensive when you switch from, the whole CapEx, OpEx discussion, which we didn't touch on. So when people get their first cloud bills, they go, oh, wait, what? And they got to adjust things. Maybe you need some more flexibility. Maybe on-premises is better, but you want DR in the cloud. Okay. So again, we go back to, what does that look like? What does that mean? What's the best way to handle that in my company? And that's a sit-down discussion of really mapping things out. So what you said is all true. Like there's a lot of stuff, but there's no simple decision tree that gets you from here to here. When I work with customers, it's very much taking into account all that stuff, plus people's skill levels, plus where are you going in the next couple of years, plus insert any number of things here to ultimately get to that right solution. Because you're right, having things like hybrid solutions, inherently more complex, what I talked about earlier in this talk. The crux there, if we're talking about hybrid solutions of on-premises, be they physical or virtual, to any cloud provider, is networking. So now you got to worry about, okay, how big and how fast is my pipe? Am I using just a straight VPN? Am I getting something like Direct Connect or, any of that kind of stuff, which gives me a direct pipe to one of the clouds, but because of cost, we're getting one of the lower tiers, so it's slow. I've seen where that causes problems for availability solutions like availability groups and synchronization. Or you're up in a cloud and you don't want to pay for a VM proper to get the right performance, so you undersize it and your synchronization is slow because of it, because you're gated by the VM performance size. All these things are real and got to be worked through. Like, there's reasons to do hybrid. There's reasons to potentially want to fail back to on-premises. There are reasons to just use the cloud as DR. There's a reason to go all cloud and go multi-region. Multi-cloud is a whole other separate discussion. And just as full of, it depends and what are you trying to achieve. But there is no right and wrong answer here. It's the right answer for your company that finds all those trade-offs and compromises. If you're basing that solution purely on technology, you're going to fail. So I hope that helps and gives you some of the wheres and whys of when I work with customers, or how I work with customers. Is you have to kind of break it down to build it up. It's not as simple as saying, we want DR going to the cloud, or we want to have stuff in the cloud. It's, okay, we've got all this stuff. Oh, now let's take into account performance and cost and licensing. And yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to get this stuff right. You have to roll up your sleeves, but it's doable. So we've gotten to chat.
Yeah. Are there any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah. So answer Adam's question, why does it have to be Albuquerque? Go watch some Bugs Bunny cartoons, folks. May not be politically correct today, but go watch some Bugs Bunny.
They are classic. Well, I think that is going to be a wrap. If anybody has any follow-up questions, please reach out to Allan on Twitter, or if you have any questions.
Let me put that slide up. So
yeah, go for it.
So people know how to get a hold of me.
There we go.
Not like I'm that hard to find, but
Yeah, it's contact info is up on the screen there. If you have any questions for him, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you, as a viewer of this after the fact, have any other topics or even want to present for us, please let us know. We have an absolute blast with this stuff. This topic is near and dear to a lot of us. And as a data professional, it should be near and dear for you. So if there's anything on your mind, anything you're wondering, anything you want some help with, let us know. We'd be happy to help here. Until then, we'll see you next month. We've got a couple of other presenters lined up and again, are always interested in bringing more folks on. So thank you all for attending. Thank you all for watching after the fact. Thank you, Allan, for presenting. This is awesome.
Thanks for having me. Have a good one, everybody.
Yep. Take care, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.